If I told you that From may have already revealed its ending, not through a twist, not through a hidden clue, but through a pattern that's been repeating for centuries, you'd probably think that's a stretch. But the deeper you look into the story, the harder it becomes to believe anything in this town is random. Because what if the real horror isn't the monsters, or the town, or even the mystery itself, but a system that has been quietly repeating the same outcome over and over again? At first, everything in the show feels chaotic. People arrive without warning. There's no clear entry point, no exit, no logic that explains why certain people are chosen. The monsters come at night, but even they don't behave like normal predators. They don't rush, they don't panic, they follow rules. And that detail matters more than it seems, because the moment something follows rules, it stops being chaos. It becomes structure. And once there's structure, there's intent. Now here's where things start to shift. There's a growing theory that what we're watching isn't a one-time nightmare, but a repeating cycle. Not metaphorically, literally. A loop that resets itself over decades, pulling in new people, playing out similar events, and ending the same way each time. Dates like 1506, 1864, 1888, 1901, 1931, and 1978 have been linked together as possible previous cycles. And while the show hasn't confirmed this outright, the pattern is too consistent to ignore. If those aren't coincidences, then what we're watching right now isn't the beginning of the story, it's just the latest iteration. And if it is a cycle, then the most important question isn't who survives, it's what keeps the cycle going. Because cycles don't just exist, they're maintained. This is where the theory takes a darker turn. What if every cycle revolves around a child? Not just as a background detail, but as a central requirement, a witness, someone tied to the outcome in a way that determines whether the cycle continues or collapses. And if you follow that idea to its logical conclusion, then the most disturbing implication is this. In the previous cycles, those children didn't escape. They became part of it. The eerie voices, the chanting, the children repeating Aunt Cooey, those moments don't feel like random horror anymore. They feel like echoes, remnants of something that already happened. According to the theory, these are the 6 children from previous cycles, trapped in what fans call the Lake of Tears. Not gone, not free, just waiting. And once you accept that, everything changes. Because now you're not just watching people trapped in a town, you're watching people step into a process that has already claimed others before them, 6 times. Which brings us to the present. Because if 6 cycles have already happened, then this one isn't random. It's the 7th. And that's where the story tightens around Ethan. At first, Ethan doesn't seem like anything more than a kid trying to survive, but the show keeps placing him at the center of things in subtle ways. He understands the stories, he connects to the symbols, he reacts differently to what's happening around him, and more importantly, other forces in the town react to him. He isn't just present, he's significant. So the question isn't whether Ethan matters, it's why he matters. According to this theory, Ethan may be the 7th child, the next piece in the cycle. But unlike the 6 before him, his role might not be to continue the pattern. It might be to break it. And that's where the tension in the story truly begins. Because if the cycle has always required a child to be lost, whether through sacrifice, death, or something worse, then the outcome might depend on the opposite, not losing the child, but saving him. Now think about what that means. If the system has been built around repetition, then anything that disrupts that repetition becomes a threat, not to the people trapped inside it, but to the system itself. And if Ethan represents that disruption, then it would make sense for something to try and remove him. Which brings us to Sara. Her actions aren't random, they're precise. Targeted. She doesn't just lash out, she's guided towards specific outcomes. And when she tries to kill Ethan, it doesn't feel like chaos, it feels like correction, like something is trying to force the story back onto its original path. And that raises a terrifying possibility. What if the system doesn't just exist, it actively resists being broken? Because if that's true, then the monsters aren't the real threat, they're just part of the enforcement. When you look at how the monsters behave, they don't act like creatures driven by hunger or instinct. They act like something following instructions. They respect boundaries. They move with intention. They don't need to chase because they already know the outcome they're working toward. And that suggests something deeper, something behind them. Some fans have described this as a controlling entity, something orchestrating the cycle, adjusting variables, ensuring the pattern continues, sometimes referred to as the man in yellow. This idea isn't confirmed, but it fits the logic of the system, because if everything is structured, then something has to be maintaining that structure. And once you start thinking that way, the town stops being a mystery. It becomes a mechanism. People aren't just trapped, they're placed. Events aren't just happening, they're triggered. And survival might not be luck, it might be part of the design. Now here's where it gets even more unsettling. What if Ethan isn't unique? What if he's just the latest version of a role that has existed in every cycle? That means there were other children before him, children who had the same potential to change the outcome but didn't. Whether they were sacrificed, manipulated, or simply failed to break the pattern, the result was always the same. The cycle continued. And that transforms a story into something far more disturbing. Not a one-time horror, but a repeated experiment. Each cycle testing the same conditions, each failure reinforcing the system, each new group unknowingly stepping into a role that has already been played before, until something changes. And that brings us to Victor, because Victor doesn't fit into this system cleanly. He's lived too long. He remembers too much. He exists in a way that suggests something didn't reset the way it was supposed to, and that makes him incredibly important, because in a system built on repetition, anything that doesn't reset properly becomes dangerous. Victor isn't just a survivor. He's evidence that the previous cycle has already broken once, and if it broke before, it can break again. Some theories suggest that Victor's survival is exactly why things feel unstable now, that the previous cycle didn't end correctly, and the consequences are still unfolding. Others believe he may hold the key to understanding what went wrong, what the system expects, and where it failed. Either way, Victor isn't an accident. He's a flaw in the system, and flaws are how systems collapse. Now go back to the Lake of Tears. If those 6 children are still there, still present in some form, then the system hasn't erased them. It's holding on to them, preserving them, which means the past isn't gone. It's still active, still influencing what's happening now. And that leads to one of the darkest interpretations of all. What if the monsters themselves are part of this history? What if they weren't always monsters? There's a theory that they were once human, that at some point they were given a choice, sacrifice something, someone, and gain something in return. Survival, immortality, escape. And they chose it. But instead of freedom, they became part of the system they helped sustain. If that's true, then the monsters aren't just enemies, they're consequences. And suddenly their behavior makes sense. The way they move, the way they speak, the way they follow rules. They're not mindless, they're bound, trapped in a role they can't escape, just like everyone else. Which brings everything back to one final idea. What if the cycle isn't just physical? What if it's emotional, built on memory, guilt, and repetition? Because if that's the case, then breaking the cycle might not be about escaping the town or defeating the monsters. It might be about confronting what the system is built on in the first place. And that's where Ethan becomes the center of everything again. Because if he truly is the 7th child, if this cycle is different, then the outcome doesn't depend on strength or strategy or survival. It depends on a choice. Does the pattern repeat, or does it finally break? And that's what makes this theory so compelling. It doesn't just explain the mystery, it reframes the entire story. This isn't about people trying to escape a nightmare. It's about people being pushed to repeat a decision that has already been made 6 times before. And for the first time, they might not. Because the real horror of From isn't the monsters lurking in the dark. It's the idea that everything you're watching has already happened, and unless someone chooses differently, it will happen again.